He had never met anyone like her. All his life he could hear the thoughts of everyone around him, a constant stream of secrets, desires, fears, and lies. It was both a gift and a curse. He had learned to hide himself from the world, to navigate life knowing everyone else's inner truth while protecting his own. Until the day he saw her across the crowded cafe, flipping her notebook closed with a distracted smile, and suddenly he heard nothing. Nothing, not a whisper, not a flutter of thought. He leaned closer, trying to pierce the silence that surrounded her mind like a shield, but every technique he knew failed. Panic and curiosity collided in his chest. Who was she? How could this happen? All his experience, all his power had never faced a wall like this. And strangely, even as his mind screamed for answers, he felt an unfamiliar pull toward her, a magnetic force he didn't understand. She noticed him staring, and instead of annoyance, her eyes held curiosity, calm, confident, like she knew a secret he couldn't touch. The cafe's chatter, the clinking cups, the rush of pedestrians outside, all of it faded as he realized something impossible. She was completely unreadable, and somehow he didn't want to break through. Fear tangled with fascination, confusion with desire. For the first time, he didn't want to know. The thought was terrifying. It went against everything he had ever believed, that knowledge was power, that understanding others was survival, that secrets were to be uncovered. Yet here she was, immune to his gift, and he felt exposed in a way he had never felt before. Her mind was a mystery, and mysteries, he realized, were dangerous and irresistible. By the time he left the cafe, the world had shifted. Every voice he heard, every thought he skimmed on the street, every secret spilling from strangers felt hollow compared to the silence she carried. That silence haunted him, teasing him with questions he couldn't answer, drawing him closer with a force he didn't understand. He didn't know it yet, but she had entered his life, not just to challenge him, but to change him, and the world he thought he knew would never be the same. The palace welcomed her like a dream she wasn't sure she deserved. Soft, golden light glowed from crystal walls, and the corridors seemed to shift gently beneath her steps, as if the world itself was alive and aware of her presence. Yet despite the beauty, she felt like an intruder. Every breath reminded her she didn't belong here. Servants watched her with curiosity and quiet awe, whispering legends she couldn't hear but somehow felt. She was given clean clothes woven from silver-threaded fabric and led to a chamber overlooking floating gardens, but comfort never came. Her mind replayed the moment she crossed the veil again and again, the prince's eyes haunting her thoughts, serious, guarded, and painfully kind. That night, sleep refused to claim her. When she finally closed her eyes, the air shimmered and the room filled with a familiar presence. The prince stood by the balcony, moonlight carving shadows across his face. He apologized for the guards, for the fear, for pulling her into a fate she never asked for. His voice carried a weight that went far beyond responsibility. He told her the truth slowly, carefully, as though each word could break something fragile between them. The veil between worlds was weakening, and her arrival had accelerated what had been inevitable. Magic responded to her in ways it no longer did to them. She wasn't just human, she was a key. She resisted the idea fiercely. She was ordinary. She had no magic, no training, no heroic bloodline. But the prince shook his head, explaining that the prophecy never spoke of power, it spoke of choice. A girl from another world who would walk freely between realms, unbound by ancient rules. Someone who could love without fear of consequence. As he spoke, his composure cracked, just slightly. Loving her, he admitted, would be the greatest danger of all. Kings before him had lost everything by placing their hearts above duty. Days passed, and with them her fear softened into wonder. She explored the city under guard, learning its fragile beauty, sensing the fading magic in the air. Children followed her laughing, flowers bloomed brighter when she passed, and rivers stilled as if listening. The world was responding to her, and it terrified her. Yet what frightened her most was how easily the prince slipped into her thoughts. Their conversations grew longer, their silences warmer. He showed her secret places, ancient libraries, broken temples, and quiet rooftops where the stars seemed close enough to touch. But danger followed closely behind. The council did not trust her. To them, she was a disruption, a risk they could not afford. Whispers of banishment, and worse, spread through the halls. One night, she overheard a conversation that stole the breath from her lungs. If she stayed too long, the veil might collapse completely, destroying both worlds. The prophecy had a second ending, one written in blood and loss. And the prince would be forced to choose. When she confronted him, his silence confirmed her fears. He loved his people too much to lie. For the first time, she saw the crown he never wore press down on him like a wound. In that moment, she understood something painful and true. Discovering a hidden world was easy. Surviving the love within it would not be. As she stood alone beneath unfamiliar stars, she realized her heart was already entangled in a destiny she never wanted, but could no longer escape. Days passed, but he couldn't shake her from his thoughts. Every conversation, every fleeting glance replayed endlessly in his mind, yet the mystery of her silence haunted him more than it exhilarated him. Normally, he could anticipate every word, every hesitation, every hidden feeling, but with her, he was a stranger even in her presence. It was a sensation both terrifying and intoxicating. He was vulnerable, exposed, and powerless, and for the first time, he didn't mind. Her mind was a fortress, but her eyes, her expressions, and the subtle movements of her hands were an open book he yearned to decipher. Every smile, every sigh, every fleeting glance told him something, but never enough. He found himself seeking her out in the most ordinary ways, walking past her favorite cafe, sitting in the library where she studied, lingering near the park where she sketched the same fountain every afternoon. Each encounter left him simultaneously frustrated and enthralled. He wanted to break through, to touch the truth of her mind, but each failed attempt only deepened his desire. The more he failed to read her, the more he wanted to understand her, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a person whose thoughts he might never fully know. She, too, seemed aware of the tension building between them. At first, it had been curiosity, a quiet observation, but now her gaze lingered longer, her smiles carried a trace of knowing mischief, and her words were laced with subtle challenges that forced him to think, to respond, to feel. She noticed how he hesitated, how he tried to control every expression, every gesture, as if he were carefully measuring his reactions, and she delighted in the fact that she could make him falter, that she could make him question himself. She spoke openly, honestly, but always left a gap, a silence he could not penetrate, and in that space he felt a pull stronger than any mind-reading ability, a pull that whispered that she was no ordinary girl. One afternoon, in the quiet of the library, she leaned closer than necessary, her shoulder brushing his as she pointed to a line in her notebook. He tried to sense her thoughts, but again, nothing. His pulse quickened, his heart thundering in his chest. He realized with startling clarity that he wanted to remain ignorant of her thoughts, that the mystery itself was intoxicating. How are you so calm?" he asked, voice low, almost a whisper. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Because I don't need to know everything, and neither should you." It was the first time he felt a pang of humility. For all his power, for all the control he wielded around him in the world, he had shattered the one certainty he had always relied upon, knowing the minds of others. and in that moment, he understood something profound. He didn't just want to read her mind, he wanted to earn her trust, to be allowed into her world without shortcuts, without intrusions. The challenge terrified him, but it also ignited a fire inside him he had never felt before. By the evening, as he walked home alone, he replayed every detail: the tilt of her head, the curve of her smile, the silence that surrounded her thoughts like a protective shield. For the first time, he felt powerless in the most beautiful way possible. He had met a mind he couldn't read, and it had already begun to read him. And the truth, undeniable and raw, was this: he was falling for her, deeply, irreversibly, and he had no idea what she felt in return. The days that followed were a delicate dance between proximity and distance, curiosity and caution. Every time he saw her, his instincts screamed to reach out, to understand her thoughts, to close the chasm that had opened between them, but he restrained himself. The silence of her mind, once a source of fascination, had become a challenge he couldn't ignore. It was as if the universe had placed her in his path to test him, to show him that control and knowledge were not the same as trust and love. And with every interaction, he found himself surrendering to feelings he had long kept buried: vulnerability, desire, and the frightening possibility of letting someone in without knowing all the answers. She seemed aware of his struggle, though she never spoke of it directly. Small gestures betrayed her amusement: a knowing glance, a slight tilt of her head, the way she would walk slightly faster when he lingered too close, only to slow down as if to tempt him to follow. He noticed these things, memorized them, and yet they told him nothing about what she felt inside. And that ignorance, instead of frustrating him, as it had in the past, ignited something deep within him, a longing he couldn't name, a need to approach her not as a mind reader, but as a man willing to risk everything for a connection built purely on choice. One afternoon, as rain began to fall softly outside the cafe windows, he finally confronted her, not with questions or probing thoughts, but with the simple truth of his feelings. "I don't know what you're thinking," he said, his voice steady but edged with tension. "And for once, I can't read you, and I don't want to push. But I need you to know, whatever you feel, whatever you're hiding, I want to be here." She paused, her pen hovering over her notebook, and he saw for the first time a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, a crack in the calm facade she had maintained so perfectly. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she offered a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that carried both amusement and caution. "Not everything needs to be understood," she murmured, her voice soft, almost lost in the sound of the rain. "Some things are meant to be felt." That simple statement pierced him in ways he hadn't expected. He realized that his gift, his constant ability to know others, had never prepared him for this: being in the presence of someone whose heart and mind were entirely her own, untouchable except by patience, respect, and shared experience. As the rain streaked down the windows, they sat together in silence, a charged quiet that spoke volumes. Neither needed words. The air between them carried emotion, tension, and something dangerously close to longing. For the first time, he understood the power of restraint, the vulnerability of not knowing, and the thrilling uncertainty of being seen without secrets being revealed. And as he left the cafe that evening, drenched from the rain and trembling from the intensity of their interaction, he knew one undeniable truth: he had found a mind he couldn't read, but in doing so, he had discovered something far more profound, a heart he wanted to understand, one moment at a time. The challenge was no longer about reading her, it was about earning her trust, navigating her mysteries, and confronting the emotions that had silently taken hold of him, emotions that threatened to undo all the control he had built over his life. And for the first time, he welcomed the uncertainty, knowing that some stories were worth every risk, every heartbeat, and every unspoken word. The weeks that followed were a test of patience, trust, and restraint. He found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't anticipated, compelled by curiosity and the magnetic pull of her unreadable mind. Yet with every encounter, the tension between them grew sharper, a subtle storm hidden beneath polite words and casual smiles. There were moments of warmth, a shared laugh over a forgotten coffee order, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear while concentrating, the fleeting brush of her hand as she passed him a book, but each was shadowed by the unspoken distance she maintained. She revealed enough to intrigue him, but never enough to satisfy the yearning that had taken root in his chest. One evening, a misunderstanding flared between them, small at first but quickly spiraling. He had overheard a fragment of her conversation with a colleague, a momentary hesitation, a word that sounded like doubt about him, and his instincts, trained for years to detect truth and lies, misread it entirely. Confronting her, he demanded answers, his voice edged with frustration he hadn't intended. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, tension vibrating in every word. "Why are you hiding things from me?" She froze, hurt flashing across her features, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came. She wasn't hiding, she was simply herself, not bound to explain every thought to him. But he, unaccustomed to this vulnerability, couldn't see it. The silence that followed was electric. He realized, almost painfully, that this was the first time he had ever felt powerless, not from lacking information, but from lacking connection. She was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a mystery he couldn't decode, and it terrified him more than he had expected. Yet, in the midst of that tension, he also felt something stirring. Desire, longing, and the realization that he wanted to be near her even when frustrated, wanted to bridge the space she maintained even when it frightened him. Later that night, he found himself walking the city streets alone, replaying their interaction over and over. He understood, with clarity, that she was teaching him a lesson he had never learned before. Love is not a force to control, a thought to read, or a heart to predict. Love is about patience, presence, and the courage to accept someone as they are, even when they remain unknowable. And for the first time, he embraced that uncertainty. The next day, she appeared in the cafe as if nothing had happened, a small, mischievous smile lighting her face. "You seem quieter today," she teased gently, the edge of their argument softened by the playful tone. He couldn't help but smile back, though his heart still ached with the memory of their tension. Words felt unnecessary between them now. Each glance, each shared gesture spoke volumes. He was learning, slowly, that her silence was not a wall to overcome, but a space to inhabit, a rhythm to follow, a challenge worth meeting with patience and honesty. As evening fell, he realized that despite the misunderstanding, despite the moments of doubt and misinterpretation, he had grown closer to her than anyone else in his life. She had forced him to confront feelings he had long suppressed, vulnerability, desire, and the thrilling uncertainty of being truly unknown to someone, yet entirely captivated by them. And in that realization, a quiet truth settled deep in his chest. The mind he could not read had begun to read his heart, and in ways he had never anticipated, he was falling, for the first time, uncontrollably, irreversibly, and completely for her. The moment came quietly, without fanfare, yet it carried the weight of every heartbeat they had shared since the first encounter. He found her standing beneath the glow of a street lamp, rain falling softly around them, each droplet catching the light like scattered diamonds. He stepped closer, feeling the familiar pull, the one he had tried to resist, the one that had grown stronger with each day they had spent in this dance of curiosity, misunderstanding, and silent longing. For once, he didn't need to read her mind. Her eyes spoke volumes, filled with a mixture of courage, vulnerability, and a quiet hope that mirrored his own. "I've tried," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "to know you, to understand every thought, but I can't, and I don't want to, because every moment with you, even without knowing your mind, has shown me more than I ever knew about myself." She blinked, a flicker of emotion crossing her face, surprise, hesitation, and something deeper, almost relief. He reached for her hand, and for the first time, the barrier between them felt real, yet surmountable. She held his gaze steadily, her voice soft but unwavering. "You don't need to read me. You only need to choose me," she whispered. The words, simple yet profound, struck him with the force of everything they had been through, the tension, the misunderstandings, the slow, thrilling pull of hearts colliding without shortcuts or guarantees. In that instant, he understood fully. Love was never about control or certainty. It was about courage, trust, and the willingness to step forward into the unknown together. And so he did. He stepped closer, closing the small space between them, and she didn't flinch. Their hands met, fingers entwined, and the world seemed to pause, allowing the magic of their connection to bloom fully, unbroken by doubt or expectation. The rain continued to fall, but it felt like a benediction, a cleansing of old fears, and a herald of a love that could exist without manipulation, without intrusion, without knowing every secret before it was spoken. In the weeks that followed, their bond deepened with every shared glance, every touch, every unspoken understanding. He never regained the certainty that reading minds had once given him, but he found something infinitely more valuable, a connection that was alive, unpredictable, and breathtakingly real. She had shown him that some hearts could not be read, and those were the ones worth chasing, worth waiting for, worth loving without hesitation. The city lights reflected in her eyes one evening as they walked side by side, and he realized he had found more than mystery or challenge. He had found a home, a partner, and a love that could not be measured by thoughts alone. And as their hands tightened together, he finally understood. Some gifts are not meant to give control. They are meant to teach surrender, trust, and the astonishing beauty of falling completely, irrevocably in love. And so, beneath the rain and the soft glow of the night, two hearts beat in tandem, unreadable, unstoppable, and perfectly intertwined.